On this edition of Southern Newsweek, windows are smashed and a man is charged with willful damage in central Dunedin. A disability advocate in Invercargill says footpaths need to be improved. And we're on board a booze bus on a busy Saturday night in Dunedin. Kia ora, I'm Melissa Barton. A planned new building for teaching trades at Otago Polytechnic has secured backing from the government. The government is helping out with a $10 million grant and an $18 million loan towards the construction of the new teaching centre.
The government is investing $28 million in a new purpose-built centre right here at Otago Polytechnic in Dunedin. Yeah.
MP for Dunedin North, David Clark, announces government funding for a new building at the Otago Polytech for teaching trades. The money consists of a $10 million grant plus an $18 million loan. Clark says the construction, which is set to commence around the new year, will help create jobs in the south.
Particularly in a post-COVID environment where tourism and other industries have been hit, this is a real blessing. It gives us the chance to grow those workforces, to credential them, to make sure that they then have work opportunities through the hospital rebuild and beyond.
It's hoped the Polytech's new building will be teaching trade students by 2023, qualifying them in time for Dunedin's massive hospital rebuild, which will hopefully inject the city's economy.
Let's not forget that the smaller building at the hospitals is got a bigger budget than the stadium had. It's not a small building, but it's the next step up from this kind of construction project, and then the final large building is the biggest one in New Zealand history.
Otago Polytechnic CEO Megan Gibbons got to turn the first sod on the site where the building will be, and she says it will give much needed space to teach courses they're currently unable to.
And we're restricted in what other trades we can teach because of space, and so we can't do things like plumbing, gas fitting, drain laying. We can't do tiling, those sorts of things that are going to support the build. So it's nice to have the space to be able to extend our portfolio as well.
Construction of the three-storey development is expected to employ about 200 trades workers. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A man was arrested in central Dunedin after allegedly smashing through a window and climbing on top of a shop awning. Police officers lined the streets as well as stationed themselves inside the Community Corrections Office as they tried to coax the man back inside.
Lower Stewart Street and Moray Place were cordoned off this morning after a man walks onto an awning above shops, making it to a fire escape ladder on a neighbouring building. Windows were smashed on the first floor Dunedin Central Community Corrections Office, sending glass to the street and passing cars. Eyewitness Matthew Wedd was in the probation offices attending his last meeting when he heard a commotion.
All of a sudden started hearing loud thumping, wondering what that was, assuming someone was punching a wall, a bit frustrated. Then the thumping got louder and louder, and then smashing of glass. And I've been in there more than once. The glass isn't thin, it takes a fair amount of effort. So yeah, just a little bit of, oh, okay, well, if someone's got that much aggression, I might want to stay in this room for a little bit longer.
The man remained on the awnings for 10 to 20 minutes, yelling at people in the street. Police shadowed his moves from the ground before he was taken into custody, just before 11:30 a.m. Dunedin police say they were called to the building about 10:50 a.m. The man tried to evade police, but was arrested half an hour later. In Dunedin, the South Today.
The Invercargill City Council could improve its mobility parking spaces and pathways to make the city more wheelchair friendly. That's according to resident Tracy Smith, who says the cost to make the city safer for wheelchair users would not be expensive.
Invercargill resident Tracy Peters says it wouldn't cost much to turn Invercargill into a much more wheelchair friendly city.
I really do not believe it's going to cost any extra money. There are some simple things that can be done to make it easier and safer for everybody, because nobody's getting any younger. And more importantly, disability is not an exclusive club. Anybody at any time can suffer a disability, short-term or long-term. Nobody's exempt. So let's make Invercargill an easier, safer city for people to get around.
She's already presented a submission at the Council's last Infrastructural Services Committee meeting and says one thing that would make things much safer for low-riding wheelchair users would be mirrors at some of the city's uncontrolled crossings.
For instance, on East Street, with all those cars parked, it can be quite dangerous for me to try and get across the road because I can't see over the cars and cars coming up the street can't see me. So if there was perhaps some mirrors, then pedestrians could see in the mirror if there's something coming. They could see whether it was safe to step out.
Peters points out that town planners seem to forget how much space is needed for a mobility park to be safe and effective.
7 metres is actually a lot of space. That's what you need. And in a lot of the car parks, the length is only the length of the vehicle. They haven't sort of thought, well, okay, there's the length of the vehicle and then there's a ramp and a wheelchair. And even if you don't have a ramp, even if you're lifting a wheelchair out of the back of a vehicle, you still need 7 metres because you've got to be able to physically reach, lift the wheelchair out, manoeuvre yourself backwards.
Peters says she's planning to meet council officials next week to discuss her concerns. In Invercargill, the South Today.
Police conducted 3 checkpoints in Dunedin recently in a bid to catch drink drivers. Over the course of the operation, 14 people were caught driving while intoxicated.
This Dunedin police checkpoint on Saturday night caught a number of drink drivers. Sergeant Bruce Martin says the results were disappointing and everyone needs to consider the risk they could pose to others on the road.
For those people that we deal with, most of them are normal, nice people that make poor decisions and get behind the wheel. And most people that we deal with we never see again. However, they put you and your family at risk. Every other road user at risk.
As a police officer, Sergeant Martin has seen the horrors of drink driving on New Zealand roads.
I've dealt with families that have lost loved ones through drink drive crashes over the last 30 years. Those families never recover from the death of a loved one, whether it be a husband, wife or child.
And he advises people to plan their evening before they drink.
For people that are looking at consuming alcohol before driving, really don't drink at all is probably your safest bet, but limit yourself to 1 drink, then you know you're going to be safe.
Alcohol contributes to about 30% of New Zealand's fatal road crashes. Over the past 10 years, over 1,000 people have been killed and a further 5,000 injured in drink driving crashes. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Still to come on Southern Newsweek, contractors working on the Dunedin Hospital project begin work on the Wilson's parking block. And construction at Ereira Town School is set to be completed by the end of the year, so see you after the break. Welcome back. The demolition program for the new Dunedin Hospital project continues to progress. Contractors are set to enter buildings in the Wilson parking block with the idea of levelling the site by Christmas.
Work on the next stage of the Dunedin Hospital project is set to start on the now former Wilson's parking lot. But Program Director Mike Barnes says the public might not see what they're doing for a while, as they have some internal clearing to do.
So in preparation for the major demolition exercise, we've got to get rid of, first of all, the bolt-ons to the building, if you like. We've got to start looking at some of the hazardous substances, so that'll be the next phase.
Barnes says the project is mostly back on track following a slight delay under COVID-19 lockdown, and scaffolding is due to go up around the building in the coming weeks. Asbestos is one of the major health risks to workers and potentially the public while demolishing older buildings, but Barnes says it's not such a big issue with this part of the project.
It's not too bad compared to a lot of sites around the country. I think it's just a function of the age of the building that it wasn't as affected by asbestos. We're quietly happy at the smaller amount of asbestos that we had to deal with, but in terms of volume, I couldn't give you a figure.
His sentiments are shared by Ceres New Zealand project manager Ryan Ereira, who agrees they've been fortunate with these buildings.
Potentially there's a few, some cement panels and stuff in a few places, but we've got pretty lucky, we think, really, with the asbestos that's actually on site here. I thought it was going to be 10 times as much, to be honest, but it's not been so.
There are currently between 20 and 30 employees on site, and Ereira says they aim to employ as many locals as possible, and made that clear in the successful tender for the job.
We try and employ as many local people as we can, so we've been quite active with all the labour hire companies and what with adverts on Trade Me and Seek, etc., looking for people, so it's probably about half of the people on site are actually from Dunedin.
Ereira says they plan to have the buildings on this site flattened and the site ready by Christmas. In Dunedin, the South Today.
The redevelopment of Ereira School is finally taking shape, 8 years after problems with leakage were discovered. Principal Chris Bryant says the bulk of construction work should be completed by the end of the year.
Ereira School is nearing the end of a massive $11 million redevelopment, which includes replacing a number of buildings that were identified as being leaky in 2012. School Principal Chris Bryant says there's been a lot of transformation in the last 2 years.
Probably the beginning of last year we started with demolition and the refurbishment of a couple of the classrooms that haven't been pulled down. So we're standing on, I suppose, at the end of phase 2, which is the refurbishment of this block here, where the leaky building issues have been addressed. Looking out behind me there, we've got the new admin and staff lounge, which is nearing completion. That's going to be finished by the end of this term, so we'll be into that in term 4. And then over your left shoulder there, I'm looking at the construction work going on our new 14 class learning area, or 14 learning spaces, and that's due to be finished at the end of this year.
The project has not been easy to work around, and 4 temporary classrooms have had to be put into use. But Bryant says he's been very impressed with the attitudes of both staff and pupils.
I can't speak proudly enough of the staff and the kids here. We've been in this disrupted state for at least 2 years. COVID-19 threw another spanner in the works, so to speak. But everybody has just pulled together, adjusted to the environment and worked really well. The teaching and the learning has remained exceptional. Kids have remained settled and engaged in what they're doing, and the staff have worked really hard.
The school's buildings date back to 1997, when eaves were out of fashion. The Ministry of Education says there were no health and safety issues associated with the leaky buildings. In Ereira, the South Today.
A home in the Dunedin suburb of Corstorphine has been left uninhabitable after a fire tore through it recently. The blaze was just one of many Dunedin house fires in recent months.
5 Dunedin fire crews were called to a sofa on fire at this house in Middleton Road just before 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Upon arrival, the firefighters found the house to be well alight.
So on arrival, we had a crew and breathing apparatus with a hose through the front door, and that was followed up by another crew at the rear of the property doing some firefighting from outside to try and minimise the effects of the crews inside.
More than one smoke alarm had sounded, and all people have been accounted for. However, the interior of the house has been extensively damaged by smoke and heat.
We have a couple of ideas what could have caused it, but until we actually put the fire out and investigate further, I'd rather not drop those ideas in case I am wrong. So we will investigate further. At this stage, we're not looking at a suspicious fire, so our further investigation will hopefully confirm that.
Smoke could be seen rising from the blaze across the city. In Dunedin, the South Today.
More than 100 volunteers took up positions around Dunedin and Mosgiel, taking part in the annual Life Matters street appeal. The Dunedin-based organisation operates the Hope Centre in Albion Lane, offering support for people affected by suicide.
Waiting for donations. Collectors around Dunedin today in the annual Life Matters street appeal. Corinda Taylor says they're a stopgap for people who might fall through the cracks of mental health services, and says they're very busy following COVID-19, with many people needing services from the ground up.
There are massive long waiting lists currently to get into support for people elsewhere, and we can keep people safe in the Hope Centre whilst they're waiting to engage with their counsellors or therapists.
Taylor is at pains to thank the 100 or so volunteers who gave their time today, with many 2-person teams across town. Peer volunteer Cassandra Dawson has spent the day as a runner and says people across Dunedin have been giving well.
I was up at Roslyn at the Fresh Choice there, and it was awesome to see people put notes in to be like, I'm a survivor that I want to support. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Life Matters doesn't receive any government funding, and Corinda Taylor says she'd welcome conversations with government officials either side of September's general election. In Dunedin, the South Today.
After the break on this edition of Southern Newsweek, a world-beating motocross rider competes closer to home, and we meet one of the world's oldest working VW mechanics who's still fixing cars at 80 years old. So catch this and more after the break. Thanks for staying with us. Mere seconds and decades of technology were all that separated first and second place at the annual Bob Scott Memorial Hill Climb. And for descendants of Bob Scott, it was definitely a family affair.
The hills around Kaitangata echoed with the sound of high-octane motors as competitors in the Bob Scott Memorial Hill Climb took turns racing up a 1.8 kilometre track at the weekend. Course clerk Janie Blair says it was fantastic to hold the event in such great conditions, with the road covered in snow just a few days earlier, and is regularly used by large forestry vehicles.
We were very lucky because one of our friends, Graham Helm, came and graded the road for us beforehand, so made it a bit better than it was, because the long trucks do make a mess.
Balclutha rally driver and previous winner Dean Bond held off determined challengers in his 20-year-old Mitsubishi Evo 6.5, eventually winning the event by just 1.28 seconds.
No, I haven't. No, we know we won, but we don't know the time of that very last run. I think feeling in the car was definitely quicker than our previous run that had given us the win anyway, but yeah, I'll have to see how we went. Yeah.
The aim of the annual hill climb is to make the fastest run up a 1.8 kilometre gravel forestry road near Kaitangata. Dunedin's Robert Scott, son of the late Bob Scott, drove his father's V8 Chevy-powered Classic and says the road conditions were great this year, meaning it was fun for all the family.
It's about 60, 65, it's a V8 Chevy in this one, and my father's two cars here are running too, the Cortina Special and the Ford Flathead V8 Special, and my dad's grandson's driving one and his other brother Greg's driving the other one, so yeah, we're all having a good time.
Each driver has 4 attempts to record their fastest time on the track. First on the day was Dean Bond in the Evo 6.5 with a time of 1 minute 22.15. Second place was Jack Winter in a specialised cross car 1.5 seconds later at 1 minute 23.43, and third place was Matt Penrose in another cross car coming in shortly after Winter with a time of 1 minute 23.94. In Kaitangata, the South Today.
Female motocross rider Courtney Duncan gave an absolute masterclass display in Cromwell. Originally from the small township of Palmerston, just north of Dunedin, the 24-year-old showed the crowd why she is the reigning Women's World Motocross Champion.
Getting plenty of air on her green 250cc Kawasaki, Women's World Motocross Champion Courtney Duncan took part in races on Sunday in Cromwell, beating the nearest female rival by over a lap, and then going on to beat the men in their races as well. Now at the top of the world in her class, Duncan's visits to New Zealand in recent years have been little more than a month at a time. But thanks to COVID-19, she's been in the country for a while now and says she was keen to keep her skills up by attending a local race meeting.
Yeah, what better way to get some, prep in, and like they say, you can't substitute racing, so it's good to get some race pace in, and there's a lot of local kids that are going really good at the moment, so it's good training for me.
While Duncan has had numerous setbacks and crashes, and even a collision with a wayward photographer, she seems to take a pretty relaxed attitude to race strategy.
But, we just go out there and have fun and race, and obviously want to win, so kind of whatever pace it needs to be to win, and just play it as the race comes, really.
Duncan's friends and extended family, including some of her grandparents, got to attend what is now a rare sight of seeing Courtney Duncan racing in her home province.
Yeah, it's really special to be here. Actually, I train here quite a lot, so to come here on race day and have, as you just saw, all my family and friends come along and support me is really cool, because obviously these days racing overseas, there's not too many opportunities I get like this, so it's always nice to give back as well.
The Kawasaki's Duncan rides in New Zealand are supplied by Motorworks Winton. In Cromwell, the South Today.
Dunedin mechanic Ken Berry has just turned 80 years old and has no plans to retire. He's been a Volkswagen specialist for roughly the same number of years as their famous Beetle was in production.
The current retirement age in New Zealand is 65 years old. However, people can choose to work longer, and having just turned 80, Dunedin mechanic Ken Berry shows no signs of hanging up his tools just yet.
You're a long time dead, so I don't know what I'm going to... I don't like to be sitting around doing nothing.
Berry still works full-time, but admits to working just 9 to 5 during winter. He's in the same workshop where he began working in 1977, but started working on cars after school roughly 20 years before that.
When I was at Scouts, the Scout Master asked me one day what I was going to do, and I told him I wanted to be a mechanic, and he said, well, we need an apprentice, so he put my name down, and I used to go there after school on my bike and watch the guys working and talk to them, and had a good grounding before I even actually started with them.
His workshop is a wonderland of Volkswagen parts, with all manner of bits and bobs stacked around the place. As he's technically at retirement age, he admits to being a bit choosy about what he does with gearboxes and engines.
Some of it now is too hard to do. I have to, if somebody wants a gearbox out of a combi or something, they can take it out themselves and give it to me nice and clean, and I'll do it for them.
He's known as the V-dub man to many people in the south, and over the years has worked on a dazzling array of vehicles, some chopped up, some put back together, and some totally rebuilt. While at 80 years old he can still do most of the tasks required of a mechanic, he really isn't thinking about retiring just yet.
I'll review the situation at 90.
He's also a keen V-dub driver. His current pride and joy is one of the last Beetles made in Germany, which he rebuilt between 1996 and 2012. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Dunedin may be home to the southernmost foosball club in the world. A European-born lecturer at the University of Otago with a passion for table soccer is hoping to start a national league across New Zealand.
Even to the untrained eye, the difference between people playing table soccer and a foosball expert is easy to see. And it's more than just the use of a golfer's glove.
Yeah, so it's important that you have good control over the handle, so you need a lot of grip to accelerate the rod.
Paul Schuschke has been wanting to establish a table soccer club in Otago for about 18 months, and now believes Foosball Dunedin is the southernmost club playing the sport in the world.
Yes, so I couldn't find any other club that far south on the hemisphere.
Schuschke says it wouldn't have been possible to set the club up without a generous gift of these professional tables. He says getting the tables here came about following a chance meeting.
I meet people, I ask them, do you play foosball? And so once I met this German family, asked them, do you play foosball? And then they said no, but our best friend is the vice president of the German Table Soccer Federation. Half a year later, this vice president called me and asked me whether he can send us 7 tables to set up in New Zealand. And that's how we got these tables for free.
And his mission now is to make foosball popular across New Zealand. So far there are also clubs in Christchurch and Auckland. Melita Bush is a student in Schuschke's department and says when she's not studying behavioural and physiological influences on age and first foraging in Vespular wasps, she and her friends are rapidly becoming converts to the game.
When Paul came to zoology, he brought the foosball table with him, encouraged us all to play, and it was just really fun to do it, and breaks from work, good stress relief. Foosball
Dunedin players meet Tuesdays between 5:30 and 7 in the foyer of Unipol. And Schuschke says all are welcome. In Dunedin, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, visit odt.co.nz and follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Ka kite anō.
supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.